Action.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Filmmakers Focus. I'm Doc Kennedy, and this week's special guest is Dan Benamor. Dan is sharing with us tips for selling your movie to a niche audience. I like saying niche. I know a lot of people say niche, but, you know, it's one of those things I really don't care. But Dan's going to be sharing with us the creation of his new film, Initiation. He and his cousin co-produced, made this thing happen. So I'm excited to get to that. I'll give you a quick update about what's going on with myself. I've been doing stand-up lately, and that's kind of been my focus. So I've been back on stage now for a few weeks, and it's just been awesome. It's been great, just getting a feel. I feel like I'm getting my feet under myself, and I'm getting some ideas of where I want to take that thing. So it's also helped me with acting, and, I'm not seeing any negatives with it. So I'm going to keep plugging away, and know that I feel like God's going to use that somehow. So I'm excited about where that's going, and that's really been my focus of late, is just plugging away there. I have some small video projects I've been working on as well and whatnot in that area, but just plugging away with the writing, especially the writing of new material. So that's been my main focus. So it's fun to just be doing anything that has to do with the arts, and it's something that's going to help me as a writer, as an actor, and hopefully eventually will lead to some income. So I'm excited to have that extra arrow in the quiver, and I'm having fun doing it, and that's the important part. I am enjoying it. All right, so with that, we're going to get to our interview right now with Dan Benamor.
And now our feature presentation.
Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Doc.
I'm excited to have you, buddy. You got this new film out called Initiation. I love your story. So why don't you share with us a little bit about Initiation, and we'll get to know you a little bit.
So, in regards to Initiation, it's basically sort of a horror action thriller. It's a movie about a group of strangers. They're kidnapped, and they're taken to this sort of isolated location, and they realize that they've been kidnapped by a cult. And to be a member of this cult, you basically have to fight a guy to the death. And that's why they've been kidnapped, is basically to be the people that the members of the cult fight to the death to be initiated. And so these people that don't know each other, they're complete strangers, and they basically are thrown into this insane situation, and they have to try to find a way to survive.
So when you went to write this, and you're a screenwriter, what was your thought process? Did you already have the idea in mind? Was it something that just kind of came as you were writing?
So I co-wrote this with my cousin Oren, and he already had a script. And we had, us being cousins and obviously keeping up with what, the other person is doing, we had talked about it, and then I read the script. And as we kept talking about it, eventually we just transitioned to me coming in and co-writing it. And so pretty much, my track was very much screenwriting, and, I had worked in development, and that's had been my complete focus. So I had some thoughts, and, we kind of just, I did a rewrite. He took it, he would rewrite it, and we went back and forth. And, basically what we tried to do is find a way to take this premise, which is very much genre and very kind of pulpy and stuff, and invest it with some real emotion. And I think that, that was something that was important to us, that the movie have something to say and kind of be about something. And we've been really pleased with, we were really pleased with how it turned out, and we got some really nice reviews from some horror websites. And I think that element of it has come through in the movie. So we're very happy with that.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the questions that we always get is, how'd you go about funding this film?
Well, so for that, we had an excellent team of producers, definitely equity financing. I mean, this is definitely a low budget movie. But I think it was just a cobbling together that equity financing, But we had incredible team of producers, and it was a coalition of the willing, basically.
So when you were writing for locations? Did you have an idea of where you were going to be shooting?
Yeah, we did. Our primary location in the film was the location that Oren knew he could get. And so the script was actually written around knowing, okay, we know we can get this one location for sure. And it was kind of an interesting location. In the film, the main characters are locked in this sort of prison cell in this basement. And so it's a very specific kind of thing. And that was the location that he knew he could get. And so that, I think, informed a lot of the thrust of the story, is that we knew we had that. And then we also put in a second location, and that's the woods, which, again, if you're making a low-budget movie, the woods is a great location because it's very sort of low maintenance. I mean, you can it's not expensive to shoot in the woods, basically. Yeah. So we pretty much had those two locations, and, then the challenge becomes making the character dynamics and giving it a sense of sort of dynamism within those two primary locations.
Yeah, that's something that I always try to encourage people, is to write for a location, write for what you have, because I think people really miss out on that opportunity to actually make something. You're trying to write something that, I was looking at a story recently somebody wanted me to take a peek at, and I said, well, I can't even touch this because this would be millions and millions of dollars that I'm not in position to get a hold of. But we could write something that would make sense to what we have.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do. We've been talking about doing another movie, and we sat down and we basically said, okay, well, what do we know we can get, and what do we have, and then it actually is helpful, I think, for the creative process, because for me, if you just give me a blank slate, that's a little bit tougher, because it's like, man, I can do anything. Like, one of the interesting things that I've had to adjust to is that. For myself as a writer, I had this transition where now I'm repped, and I have manager and agent and lawyer and all that stuff. And I'm working on projects that are different from the independent sort of realm where it had been most of my career prior. And it's really weird, like, writing stuff and not having to worry about the budget. But when you're doing independent film, yeah, I mean, I do find it helpful. I mean, I think when you put me in a box, I can try to find ways to kind of sneak out of that box. As opposed to if you say, like, hey, man, the world is your oyster, I find that the constriction forces you to be a little bit more creative.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I find people that are both ways. One of my best friends, he writes, and he likes to have that open box. He just wants to let his mind go wherever he wants. And if I try to get him to write for a location, it actually closes him up a little bit. But, so we're all wired a little bit different. And I love that you're able to do both.
Yeah, I mean, it forces your mind to kind of be open to a little bit of everything. I mean, that was kind of the cool, I had, having worked in development, I was basically the head of development for a independent production company. And so at any given time, we'd have like 30 projects in development, and they were across genres. Like, I've developed, produced films that are like, faith-friendly films, romantic comedy type stories, straight drama, Western, action. So, I mean, I've sort of had my mind in a little bit of everything. And when you do that, there's not really a lot that'll throw you off later. Like, it's a good training for writing, because, it's like, just give me the, the groceries, I'll make dinner kind of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that. That's a great analogy. So what was your thoughts ahead of time? When did you guys start thinking about distribution, how you were going to make that happen?
Well, I thought about it immediately. I mean, I don't know if Oren, when he initially thought of it, was thinking distribution, or just was the idea that came to him creatively, and it was just a happy accident that it's, I think, very distribution friendly. We had always talked about my experiences, and so I think there's a good chance that kind of seeps into his brain as well. Because, I mean, this is kind of like an ideal, in my opinion. If you're going to make a movie for a very low budget, and you're going to not have the money to get necessarily like a big name actor, I think this is pretty much what I would do a priori if you kind of had the idea to plan it out, because it's kind of hits a lot of boxes. It's action, it's horror, it's thriller. So for the foreign market, it's sort of, you got the best chance of selling it of anything that you're going to have that doesn't have a star in it. If this was a romantic comedy or a straight drama, and it also had additionally nobody that's a big name in it, that's really kind of sledding uphill. Even in the domestic market, when we actually initially went to get distribution for this film, we had 3 different distributors that wanted it.
Wow.
And we ended up going with Gravitas Ventures, and I'm really glad we did. We had a really nice experience with them. But I think that speaks to the fact that this is a movie that if you're going to do this kind of movie, it's a good one to do because it's a concept that's pretty easy to market. I think it's a relatively high concept premise. It kind of will appeal to a horror demographic, but it will also appeal to an action demographic. It's a movie that can, we have pretty intense key art that hopefully will get your attention. I think in general, for people who want to go and watch a horror movie or like a hardcore kind of action movie, I don't think I think that's less star driven than some other genres. Mm-hmm. And especially, on video on demand, horror tends to do relatively well. So there was a lot of facets to this, even when we initially were talking about this concept, that I right away keyed on and said, wow, well, I think that will be something that we'd have a pretty good shot at getting some sort of distribution.
Yeah, that's great, man. I love that you were thinking ahead on that. I think also, I see a lot of guys that are not necessarily thinking that way.
Well, I learned the hard way because, before I worked in development, I was in Canada. I'd gone to film school, in Vancouver Film School, and I made this first movie, Betrayed, and it was not really an action movie. It was sort of like a crime thriller,
okay.
But it was more talky. It was more like, sort of like a Reservoir Dogs kind of thing, and there was nobody famous in it. And I basically, now looking back on it years later, I realized that that's not a good fit if you don't have any name actor, because you're basically saying it's not an action movie. That's a distinction that I think people don't necessarily get in terms of the commercial appeal until you actually go through it. Because I had, when I was, head of development at this production company, I had a bunch of projects that we almost made. And what would end up happening would be they weren't really action movies. They were kind of thrillers, but there wasn't that much action in them. And we would take them out to the marketplace, and the feedback would be like, well, it's not an action movie. It's like kind of a thriller, thrillery drama. And that's not what they're looking for. That basically, it doesn't fall into the box of action. Or in our case for this one, horror. I had learned the hard way that this was an issue. And so when my cousin and I were talking about this concept, I said, man, great, perfect, right? It kind of hits that box in terms of distribution, I think, pretty cleanly.
So kind of on this subject as well, what would you have done different with Initiation, looking back? Is there anything that you would have changed?
I don't think so, man. I mean, we had such a good experience. We had our cast and crew screening like a month ago or something, and I think we all just really were feeling really good about the movie. I mean, I'm so impressed with how Oren directed this movie.
Oh, cool.
It's a movie that does not feel like a small, low-budget movie at all. And, I mean, we got some really nice reviews. Bloody Disgusting gave us a nice review. Some horror websites that are linked on our IMDb page have also given us really nice reviews. And I think it speaks to, everybody came in and kind of put their A game on. We had really great actors that really gave committed performances and totally, understood what we were going for, trying to make an elevated kind of approach to this sort of material. And it just turned out good, man. I mean, it's one of those things where you can't really plan for it to turn out good, truthfully. Most of the time you're like, it's probably not going to turn out great. But this actually genuinely turned out good. We're really, I'm really proud of the film.
That's awesome. So is this Oren's first time directing?
Oren has directed a ton of stuff. This is the first feature that he's done, but he's directed forever. He's done a million shorts, web series, pretty much anything you name it. He's directed it. So he came in with a ton of experience, and it definitely showed in the movie. I think the fact that we have such uniformly good performances and they're all of the same tone, that says a lot about him as a director, that he knew what he was doing.
Awesome. So, Dan, for that person out there that's kind of maybe just getting into the industry, they don't really know where to start, what advice would you give them for starting out as a screenwriter, as a producer, as a director? What would you do?
I mean, my path was basically sort of like looking at it almost like a math problem, right? So it's already ridiculously difficult to a point of absurdity. So how can you kind of lower the odds and take the path of least resistance? So for me, what I figured was, you know, when I was just starting out, I just said, all right, well, what's the most likely to actually get you some sort of traction? So that's why I started independent film, you know, and I will continue doing stuff in independent film. I've loved working in independent film. The thing is, the bar is just a little bit lower to clear in terms of access. You know, after working independent film as long as I have, and doing all the stuff I've done, now I got to a place where I ended up getting representation, and I'm exploring kind of the bigger kind of studio world and all that stuff. But I think if you start out and your attitude is, well, I'm going to immediately write this big movie and, you know, it's going to sell to a big studio and this and that, I just think it's unrealistic. I mean, I personally, you know, when I started, I was writing stuff that could be done as an independent film. You can get to independent film producers. It's not something that's hard to do. Like, independent film producers are looking for stuff, and they don't really care where it comes from. It's the kind of the next tier up, where it's studio films and stuff like that you really probably need to be, you know, legit and repped up and, you know, have some sort of serious clout behind you to have access to the people that are making those movies. But in the independent film world, I think it's just, you know, the access part is just not that hard. You can just go on IMDb Pro, get some email addresses, and, you know, you can make moves. Mm-hmm. For me, it was because of an internship, you know, and I basically took this internship and ended up getting hired as an assistant, and then I got promoted, and I became eventually the head of development. So that was a big part of my story as well. But I just think in general, man, you know, I think do yourself a favor and, like, take the path that is the most likely to succeed. So for me, I mean, there's a lot of people that have had success writing weird dramas that, you know, were just so good that it was undeniable, and they, you know, that script found the right person and so on and so forth. And, you know, if that's your journey, great. But I think for the majority of writers, my opinion is you're better off, you know, writing genre stuff that has more buyers and more people that are going to potentially be interested in it. And I think, you know, when you're very much just starting, I think you're better off doing, you know, kind of staying in that independent film world, just because you can actually get to people. You can write an email and someone will read your script that has made movies, and maybe they'll make your movie. You know, I just think it's a little bit more of a realistic path when you're first starting.
Yeah. Well, and for myself, that's why I haven't made a push to join SAG. I want to be able to work as much as I can, and I know that when I do, and I will eventually, but when I will, I'm not going to have as much work. And,
right,
you know, I want to be able to hone my craft while I can. It's kind of like playing in the minors. You know, I want to make sure that I'm ready when I'm called up. So that's my thought process with that as well.
It's totally like that. I mean, I definitely am so deeply grateful that I had, you know, I mean, in addition to just learning to write before I came to Los Angeles, but then I had this incredible education of, you know, working in development, working on all these different movies in the process, and, you know, just seeing, I mean, that's was the coolest probably part about being in development as a screenwriter, is that I would see what projects actually got made, and I would see what projects did not get made. And that's a very illuminating process that kind of teaches you a lot about, there's a lot of sort of lofty ideals that, even though we're all cynical about this business, I think still survive in the hearts of writers. That, you know, to some degree, it's like, man, if it's just a good story, like, shouldn't that kind of trump everything? And unfortunately, I think the answer to that often, especially in independent film, is no. You know, there's a lot more that kind of goes into it, and it's not necessarily the best script that always gets made. A lot of times it's the script that, you know, is the easiest to make is the one that gets made, at least in independent film.
Yeah, and so kind of on that line as well, like, you do a lot of niche stuff, and you've really figured out how to make the niche work for you, whether it's horror. We were talking earlier that you've done some Westerns. You know, what are your thoughts when it comes to that, for really tailoring to a specific audience? Yeah,
I mean, you know, it's again an independent film thing, and it comes back to this idea of, like, you know, it's a business, right? I mean, it's like selling shoes or something.
Absolutely.
And if you're gonna, if you're going to make an independent film and you sort of know, okay, well, we're going to have to make this for a price, and this is kind of what it is, and how do we think we have a decent shot of actually making some money on this movie? It makes the most sense to target a niche that is being underserved by other people. So, a lot of the movies that I worked on that ended up getting produced when I was in development were movies that were targeting these niches that were underserved. And so, for example, I think I've done like 7 faith-based films. Mm-hmm. And it's weird, man. I mean, it was when I was first starting, there was a faith-based film that they had done, the producers that I was working with, that had done really well. And it was almost like surprising how well it had done. And so then we just started making more of them. And, I think now the market has kind of adjusted to that. And if you go to Walmart, there's even like a faith-based section. Mm-hmm. So, they've sort of figured it out. But it's very telling that if I go into a Walmart today and I go look at the DVD section, I can actually see all the other movies that I worked on are gone now, right? They've pretty much played out their releases, and now they're not necessarily on display like in the main kind of section. But the faith-based films that I worked on, all of them are there, like literally all of them, and movies that I did talking about years ago, and they're still there, which is pretty wild. But it speaks to the fact that, there's an audience that wants to consume this type of content, and there's not enough of it being made for them. And the same is true of Westerns, right? Yeah. Westerns is a genre that a lot of people love. And, if you can put a Western out there that has a couple people that somebody recognizes and sort of gives them what they're looking for from that genre, there's not that many other places to get it, because people are not making them that much. Studios will make a couple of Westerns a year. But, if you're somebody that enjoys Westerns, you can probably consume more than 2 or 3 Westerns in a year. So this is basically serving, again, that niche audience that's underserved.
And it's kind of like that writing for the location thing. They all come together, that you're writing for the audience, you're writing for the location. It's just wise things, that you've learned along the way, and that others will learn along the way. But, it's doing what's going to help this thing ultimately sell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the part that changed in my approach. Because before I had this kind of experience, like, when I would sit down to write something, I just say, well, what's interesting to me? And then I would write something, and, I was like, well, I think this is better than a lot of stuff that I've seen. Shouldn't that be good enough? And, it's not that easy, unfortunately. I mean, one of the things that's kind of cool, though, and it's sort of an exception to everything that we're talking about, is that when it comes to that next tier up, when you're talking about big studios and that level of screenwriting, they're just looking for, and it may not, the script may not sell or whatever, but they're looking for something that is knockout good, even if it's super weird. Like, if your script is just brilliant, it will find a place. You may get hired to write something else or rewrite something or whatever it may be, but there's still room for that. So it's not to say if you have something that you think is just the best thing ever, and it's like about, there's a script that I was on the blacklist. A friend of mine actually represents the writer, and I think it's like an Eskimo woman, and she treks across the Antarctic or something.
Oh, wow.
So, again, the least commercial thing you could ever think of in your life. But obviously the script was so good that it actually ended up on the blacklist. And I'm sure that writer will get some work off of that. So, it sort of cuts both ways. But I think the worst thing you could do is write something that's sort of commercial, you think. You're like, oh, yeah, this should be commercial. And so you're sort of giving in a little bit where you're not personally that invested in it. Yeah. Because you think that it's more commercial, and then sort of halfway do it. And either anything you do, you got to be 100% invested in it. But the real sort of sweet spot is being both 100% invested in it where you think it's awesome, but it also very clearly fits into a place in the market. I think if you can do both of those in the same project, you're in good shape.
That's great, man. Well, this has been awesome, Dan. I really appreciate you sharing your professional opinions with us and really helping our audience get to know you better. So how can people get in touch with you and check out Initiation?
Well, Initiation is out on pretty much every video-on-demand platform. It is out on Amazon. It's on iTunes. It's on Vudu. It's on PlayStation. It's anywhere pretty much you can get a movie video-on-demand. You should be able to find this movie. And then as far as me, I'm horrible about social media. There's pretty much no way to get in touch with me. You can, Initiation has a Facebook page and a website and stuff like that, but I'm not on like Twitter or anything. I'm a disaster with social media.
Hey, good for you, man. All right. Well, this has been great, Dan, and I thank you again.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
Boy, that was a great chat with Dan there, and I encourage you to check out Initiation. Check out the other films that he's got. When you go to his IMDb, which you can check out through the show notes, he's done quite a few films. And what really stuck out to me was writing for a specific audience and also the writing for a location. I think if we can get those two things narrowed down, the idea of us actually making a film becomes so much more realistic and so much more doable, a lot easier. And so I encourage you, do something simple, find that audience, know who you're aiming it at, get that marketing down, and then write for a location. Find a location that's going to work for you. Get an idea in your head of what you can do with that location. We had Robert G. Lee on some episodes ago. He was the comedian that became a filmmaker. And he had the same type of scenario. He had one building that he had to write an entire story around and made it happen. They're winning awards now, and it's been great. So I encourage you, just challenge yourself, make a location happen, and write to it. Write, W-R-I-T-E, not R-I-G-H-T. Write to it and make it happen. So I'm excited to hear how this episode has helped you in any way. Let me know. I look forward to chatting with you all soon. God bless. Go and grow.